There were 16 different comics published the month of September 1937 cover date, and we had a new publisher enter the race. Funny Picture Stories Volume 2 Number 1, now published by Ultim Comics. Inside it says Volume 1 Number 10, numbered from the original series. Gerber lists this issue as an 8, which means rare. Comics Magazine Company was formed in 1936. Entrepreneur Harry A. Chesler published Star Comics and Star Ranger through his own Chesler Publications, starting in February 1937. These titles were soon bought out by I.W. Ullman and Frank Temerson's Ultim Publications. In September 1937, Ultim acquired the Comic Magazine Company's titles, retaining Chesler as the packager for both his own previous titles and the two that were continued from the Comics Magazine Company. Financial difficulties forced Ultim to sell some of its properties, including The Clock, to Busy Arnold's Quality Comics. By January 1938, Ultim was bought out by Joe Hardy, Fred Gardner, and Raymond Kelly's Centaur Publications, which had been publishing pulp magazines since 1933. Hardy, Gardner, and Kelly used this base to create Centaur Comics, which began publishing in March 1938. Some of the highlights of Funny Picture Stories include a cover by Charles Barrow. Jack Strand is a 7-page story from artist Frank Frollo. This is a rare early science fiction story. Roughhouse Annie is a 1-page story from Charles Barrow. And he also gives us Dormitory Days in a 1-page story. It's believed he is the artist. Cop Killer was a 2-page story from writer-artist Craig Flessel, and it's believed he might also be the artist of Lucky Coin in a 3-page story. Feature Books Number 5, Popeye and His Papa, published by David McKay Publications, September 1937 cover date. This historic title was the first U.S. comic book to devote complete issues to different characters. This was the first time this was attempted in the modern comic book market. The first 25 issues are oversized black and white interior. This issue features cigar strip reprints. There's a Popeye cover by LZ Cigar, featuring Popeye and Papa. Lulu Magazine Number 5 from Sun Publications in Chicago, Illinois. Cover date September 1937. 25-cent magazine with 52 pages, edited by Don Ulsh. This is an ongoing series that ran until 1941, filled with body, one-panel gags and jokes containing adult content. The Comics Number 5, published by Dell Comics. Cover date September 1937, featured a baseball cover of wash tubs. Some of the highlights include Deadwood Gulch is a 2-page story from writer Booty Rogers, using the alias Gordon Rogers in this Western frontier story. And Gordon Rogers, born September 8th, 1904, lived until February 6th, 1996. Better known as Booty Rogers, he was an American comic strip and comic book cartoonist who created the superhero parody character Sparky Watts, which debuted in April 1940 in 40 newspapers. The strip ended when Rogers was drafted. During the 30s, Rogers illustrated cowboy stories for Dell and DC Comics. Ace Comics Number 6, published by David McKay Publications, September 1937 cover date. This had the 6th modern comic book appearances of Jungle Jim by Alex Raymond, Chick Young's Blondie, and George Herman's Crazy Cat. All 3 characters appear in all 151 issues of the series, which ran from 1937 to 1949. Also running in every early issue was Seein' Stars, featuring Hollywood movie stars, Tim Tyler's Luck, Curly Harper, and The Cats and Jammer Kids by Rudolph Dirks. Star Comics Number 6 from Harry A. Chesler, September 1937 cover date. The cover is by Charles Barrow. Some of the highlights include Little Nemo in Slumberland is a 1-page story from Bob McKay, using the alias Winsor McKay Jr. He also gives us the 1-page story Impy. There is a 2-page Foxy Grandpa story, and it's believed the art may be by Charles Barrow. Professor McScrewy is a 1-page story and one of many that Fred Gardner worked on in this issue on the artwork, including other stories like Salute to a Policeman, Sources of Famous Quotations, and he also might be the artist on I'm a Sphinx. Dan Hastings is featured in 2 different stories written by Ken Fitch with Fred Gardner art for this science fiction story. Star Ranger Number 6, published by Comics Magazine. Cover date September 1937. Features a cover by Fred Schwab. Some of the highlights include many different strips from Fred Gardenier. He gave us The Cowgirl, Lion Lou, Covered Wagons, Midnight Bandit Raid. He also drew artwork for the story Human Pelts, written by Ken Fitch, and the story Baldy, written by Norman Daniels. There is a Billy Wright pedigree of this issue. Fred Gardenier also gave us Tubby of the T-Bone Ranch in a 4-page story, and Charles Biro gave us Wild West Jr. in a 2-page story. Detective Comics number 7 from DC Comics, September 1937 cover date. The cover art is by Craig Flessel, featuring a Thompson submachine gun. Some of the highlights include a lengthy 13-page story, Slam Bradley, by Siegel and Schuster. Rifles on the River is a 6-page story written by Guy Monroe with art by Craig Flessel, and the hero, Kit Walker, was named after the Phantom's secret ID. Siegel and Schuster gave us a 4-page story called Spy. Will Eli returns with Larry Steele in a 6-page story. And Speed Saunders is a 6-page story from writer Gardner Fox and art by Craig Flessel. The Funnies, number 12, published by Dell Comics, September 1937. Our Boarding House with Major Hoople is the cover. Some of the featured stories include Dan Dunn in a 4-page story from Norman Marsh, Tailspin Tommy, a 3-page story from Hal Forrest, who also gave us the 1-page story Four Aces. Sheldon Mayer returns with Scribbly in a 2-page story. Don Dixon and the Hidden Empire is a 2-page story from writer Bob Moore and artist Carl Pfeiffer. They also team up for Tad of the Tanbark in a 1-page story. Now You Tell One is a short story from writer-artist Courtney Dunkel. The humor story came from Edward Dunkel, born 1902, lived until September 16, 1982. He was published in early Dell comic books like The Funnies and The Comics. Dunkel was a cartoonist, illustrator, and comic artist for Judge magazine in the 30s. In 1944, he did a newspaper feature called Hannah for the McClure Syndicate. Tip Top Comics number 17, published by United Features Syndicate, September 1937. Highlight characters include Tarzan, Lil Abner, Ella Cinders, Jim Hardy, Captain and the Kids, Hank Shaw the Detective, and many more. King Comics number 18, published by David McKay Publications, September 1937. There is a mile-high pedigree from the Edgar Church collection. The book has all the top characters of the King Features Syndicate at the time, led by Flash Gordon, drawn by Alex Raymond, and Mandrake the Magician. Other highlights include Little Annie Rooney and King of the Wild Mounted. New Adventure Comics number 19 from DC Comics, September 1937. Gerber calls this book rare. The cover art is by Craig Flessel and features 2 kids playing pirates. There is a mile-high pedigree copy from the Edgar Church collection. There is a Federal Men 4-page story from Siegel and Schuster featuring the character Steve Carson. Steve Conrad Adventure is featured in a 4-page story from writer-artist Craig Flessel. Dale Daring is a 2-page story from writer-artist Will Eli, and he also gives us Nadir, Master of Magic, in a 4-page story. Off the Set is a 1-page cartoon from artist Gil Fox. And Gilbert Fox, born November 29, 1915, lived until May 15, 2004, an American political cartoonist, comic artist, and editor. Fox began his career in animation at Max Fleischer's studio, but left due to labor unrest. He entered the comic book industry, working for a number of studios, including DC. In 1940, he was an editor and cover artist for Quality Comics, with his work gracing the covers of titles such as Torchy and Plastic Man. In 1941, he wrote several weeks of continuity for The Spirit daily newspaper strip, a 1941 comic book written by Gil Fox describing the bombing of Pearl Harbor in surprising detail precisely 1 month before it happened. He left the editorial position at Quality in 1943 to serve in World War II, where he worked for Stars and Stripes. Once discharged, he freelanced for Quality Comics into the early 50s. Popular Comics number 20, published by Dell Comics, September 1937. Highlights include Dick Tracy in a 4-page story from writer-artist Chester Gould, Little Orphan Annie, 4 pages from Harold Gray, Terry and the Pirates, 3 pages from Milt Caniff. Dopey Dildock in a 1-page story from Loy Burns in this humorous story. And he also gave us Streaky in a 1-page story. Loy Burns was an American comic artist who worked on Streaky, a newspaper comic strip originally started by Gus Edson. It appeared through the Chicago Tribune, New York News Syndicate between 1936 and 38. In 1940, Loy Burns came up with Spunky. Mickey Mouse Magazine number 24, published by Western, September 1937. Also, it is known as Volume 2, number 12. Features an Indian boy on the cover and features various strips such as Mickey Mouse inside. More Fun Comics number 24, published by DC Comics, September 1937. Gerber calls this issue scarce. There is a mile-high pedigree copy from the Edgar Church collection. The cover art is by Vincent Sullivan. Highlights include Sandra of the Secret Service in a 3-page story with art by Will Eli. He also wrote and drew Jack Woods in a 4-page story, and Johnny Law in a 4-page story. Craig Flussel is the artist on Pet Morgan for 2 pages, as well as Hanko the Cowhand in a 2-page story, and Bradley Boys in a 2-page story, and it features the first appearance of Nita Noble. Siegel and Schuster gave us Radio Squad in 2 pages. Mark Marson returns from artist Tom Hickey in this early science fiction story. And Dr. Occult reappears in a 4-page story from Siegel and Schuster, Schuster using the alias Ruths in this fantasy supernatural story featuring Dr. Occult and the villain Henry Duval, not the same character who had his own comic strip. And Famous Funnies number 38, published by Eastern Color, September 1937, contains a full-color portrait of Buck Rogers on the interior cover. This was the longest-running modern comic book series. Napoleon is featured on the cover by Victor Pasmino doing the artwork. Buck Rogers is featured in a 4-page story from writer Philip Francis Nolan and art by Rick Yeager under the alias Dick Calkins. War on Crime returns in a 4-page story from writer Rex Collier, artwork possibly by Kemp Starrett. This is the first modern crime genre story continually told. Bobby returns from S.M. Iger in a 1-page story. Copyright Eisner Iger. And he also gives us a 1-page Queenie story under the alias of Bob Bliss. And Keeping Up with the Jones returns in a short story from Pop Moment.